Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today there's not much you can get for a tenner, but you can get 7 Thecus NASs. So with this job lot we got from Facebook, let's get straight into it. The system you see here is a Thecus 1U4600R, a NAS system from approximately mid-2000s. It features a unique dual disc-on module design, ultimate performance with an Intel Celeron, a built-in cloud networking, 3 storage systems in one, signature dual DOM again, online RAID volume management, available with a single power supply or a redundant power supply, which is the model that we have here today. These systems are reasonably noisy and take approximately 2 to 3 minutes to boot if they're working. The password for these systems has all been 000, which is the factory default. As you can see, we have a menu system of 5 options. We'll start with link aggregation. Currently disabled, you can have load balancing, failover, balance XOR, 802.3 AD, balance TLB, and disabled again. Other menu settings include the wide area network settings, the local area network settings, and when I say settings, all you can basically do is change the address. Changing the address with 2 buttons is rather fiddly and easier done through the web portal, which we will see later. We can see that the system fan, the CPU fans are all okay. So it seems that this NAS is a happy little system. For the disk info, if there were zeros in those brackets, then that would show that there is a disk fitted. You can flash the firmware from the USB device, but we use the web portal as mentioned earlier. Now this Thecus 1U4500R failed to boot, the system wouldn't post, and I was just stuck with this display as seen here. So time to whip the top off and see what we can see inside. As you can see, we have the 2 redundant power supplies fitted on the left hand side at the rear. If neither of these cables are plugged in, you have an irritating buzzer that constantly sounds until a reset is pressed. The reset is located just to the right hand side of the second power supply in. Now we have the top off, let's give you a guided tour of the exciting insides. There isn't actually that much use space inside, with plenty of scope for adding extra bits if you wish to modify the cases. So here we have the 2 redundant power supply system. You can use either power supply to power the system, and as I said earlier, if there is a cable not plugged into the other one, it will make a beeping sound until reset. We have the front headers and inputs and outputs at the front, the PCB which has a loose connection, which takes all the SATA and power back to the main board. And as we head back round to the main board, we notice that it's an x86 based platform and gets its power via the PCI slot via this adapter board. It's a strange setup, and as you might be able to notice, this one wasn't even plugged in properly. The 4 SATA cables also plug in here, along with the 2 fan headers that are in the middle of the system. At the bottom of the screen you can see the disc-on module, and here we have 512 megabytes of DDR RAM. Nothing exciting, but it seems to be the max this system can handle. CPU wise, this tiny little cooler is very noisy as you would imagine. But it gets the job done, and hey, who doesn't like a cool anodized blue heatsink? Removing the power riser card, we can see that there's not really much to it. It's just a standard PCI card adapted to take power. Here we move to the middle of the system with the 2 very noisy loud fans. I'm not entirely sure how effective this cooling system is. To be honest, it looks rather rubbish, but hey, I'm not a system designer. It does the job, I suppose, which is all you can ask for. Moving to the rear of the drive bay enclosure, this is simply removed with several screws. It's nothing exciting, just has 4 SATA slots. However, on the back, interestingly, we have primary and secondary slots. I've checked the manual and can't see any reference to this, neither can I see any reference to these jumper settings for access from host and access from device. We can also see here where some ham-fisted baboon pulled a bit too hard on the SATA cable. But still, I'm sure some kindly fellow will come along in a minute and repair it. Now in reality, even though it was a few seconds for you, that jump cut roughly cut out approximately 20 minutes of me faffing around. We move to the front of the system now to take off the display. This seems to be a standard liquid crystal display unit and a self-contained driver for it. The programming seems to be available on GitHub, but I've yet to look into this. Maybe, in the future, we could make it say some funny entertaining things. The next PCB along is the buttons for the menu system, consisting of up, down, back and escape for all your menu-based needs. Next up we have the status and USB boards. As you can see, there is space still to be populated for another USB, and it handily lists all the pinouts, so in the future if we wanted to, we could add a buzzer and a USB too. Exciting times. The lights roughly indicate power, LAN activity and the two HDD activity lights, which seems strange because this system has 4. Moving round to the back of the system, this push-in LAN expansion board has suffered some issues. Someone has obviously repaired it because the design is rather terrible. There's obviously an incredible amount of strain on this socket when you push in a Ethernet cable. Having removed the beautiful aluminium heatsink, we can see we are presented with our Intel Celeron processor. Here's a blurry shot of my hands, and now we're back to the Intel Celeron processor. This processor is an Intel Celeron M laptop edition, 1 core, 1 thread, running at 1.5 GHz with a TDP of 21. The back, as you would expect, is gold and shiny. Putting it back before I bend it, we're taking a brief look around the system. This is where the Discon module system fits, and as you can see, it is an absolute pig to get in, and I've bent this bracket and pins several times on several of these motherboards. I also, at one point, put it on slightly askew and burnt out one of the motherboards. This is a terrible design, and if I went back in time, I would tell Thecus this. It's interesting to note that this board, the Thecus N5200 motherboard, is also one of the names of their systems, a Thecus N5200, and from what I can tell, it shares the same motherboard and many of the same features. Now I'm hoping it doesn't share the same swollen caps, but then you never know with systems of this era. As you can see, the BIOS chip is on the right hand side, which we haven't touched. This chip here is an advanced input-output controller. This chip here handles all the USB inputs and outputs. This one controls all the serial connectors and controllers running at 1.5 and 3.5 GB per second. This chip here is the Ethernet controller running at 10, 100 and 1 GB speeds. And finally we have the chip that brings it all together, the Intel I/O support chip, featuring PCI, IDE, USB, LAN and audio. Now I was interested to note that there is an unpopulated area for a VGA connector. I'd seen in another video that you can actually plug in a VGA cable and get an output, so I was keen to try what happened. This is the DOM device for the 4600. This is the CPU for the 4600R system, an Intel Celeron M, 1.8 GHz, 1 core 1 thread with a 27 watt TDP. Moving to the computer now, we can see the Thecus Web Wizard installation setupy thing. It's not very intuitive and very basic, but it gets the job done. The web portal for the 4600R system looks like this. Nothing exciting, but hey, it's better than the next one. You have all the standard options for setting up raids, the ability to send yourself emails when it goes up the shitter, create user accounts, and lots of other exciting things which I probably don't really understand well enough to explain to you. As you can see here, it's reporting an error with one of my disks, although I'm not entirely sure why, because the error isn't reported on any other system. I was successfully able to set up a RAID system using the 2 spare disks I had lying around. Unfortunately, they were different sizes though, so it caused a bit of a mismatch and a strange system volume size, as you can see. There are plenty of warnings every time you try and do something, as you would expect of a system of this era. My personal favourite is the clip art style icons, which remind me of my youth, computer lessons, making stupid clip art pictures. Now we move on to the 4500R's web interface. As you can see, this looks like a book, which is strange because it's in a web portal and seems a bit pointless. But hey, they were still learning back then. It has roughly the same options as the fancier 4600 interface, but provided in a more plain, simple style. You can upgrade the firmware, you can change the date or time or let the internet do it for you. You can align all your disks into a nice little row and set them up for a big NAS file server to store all your cat pictures, or whatever you like. Although support for these systems has long since run out. Here you can see the firmware being flashed. Thankfully, it doesn't take that long. If all has been successful, the web interface can be refreshed and you can connect again. If not, you have to get up, walk across the room and reset things. This is the front of the One U 4500 with a slightly smaller display system. You do have the option in this menu system to reset the system to default. What this does is reset all the IPs for the WAN and the LAN. I'm not entirely sure if it resets the password for the screen, but hey, if you've made it that far, you probably don't need it. I was curious to see if these displays were interchangeable, and plugging the 4500 display into the 4600, it confirms this fact, with it showing the correct firmware version for the later system. Now steady yourselves where you see my highly scientific method of holding in this cut down VGA cable. These pencils are available from most good retailers and normally come in packs of 10. Occasionally you get a rubber on the end. Thankfully this method works and we are able to get a screen output showing the Grub Legacy Edition running in the background. Here we can see that the system posts giving information and then runs through the boot up sequence. You can interrupt this process and change some of the options. However, not being too familiar with Grub, it was a bit of a learning curve for me, but I was able to get in to be able to change and edit the startup config file, have a little nose around at what some of the things do, but mainly find that it was password protected against some oath trying to find their way around a system they've never used before and changing things and causing irrevocable damage. I do not know the login for this system, but if you do, please leave in the comments below. Resetting the system, I quickly tapped down and we are greeted with the usual BIOS. The date and time is wrong as we'd expect, but it has all the exciting BIOS features you would expect from a board of this era. I was curious to see what would happen if we change some of the settings around. There seems to be the ability to overclock it, although when I did this, the system just beeped at me. It seems to like beeping at me. I feel that there is jumpers on the board that you can move around to change the frequencies and give the higher voltages, but I was unable to find any documentation on this. So we looked around, we changed some of the boot options, poked around in a few menus and then reset the system. Installing a CD drive, we were able to successfully boot into Proxmox. Now this system is nowhere near capable of running Proxmox, and I don't know why you would even bother trying this, but it was the only CD I had, so I thought I'd give it a go. Now, I'm soldering in rather badly a VGA connector. I thought it would be a nice little idea to have this as a permanent fixture rather than cables with pins floating around which I could easily bend. I did notice at this point, however, that the VGA socket I had fitted sticks out further on both motherboards than the serial connector next to it. Sliding it into the case, I find that this is indeed an issue. With a bit more searching online, I've found that these VGA sockets come in long and short form, this being the long form. I've ordered some short form sockets for the next system that I want to play with, and hopefully this will allow the board to line up fully. Although we can get round this issue for now by just simply removing the back plate. And there we are, the VGA output mounted. No funny things on the screen, or weird colours showing that it is working correctly. So there we have it, the Thecus systems. I'm not sure what I might do with these, but I'm excited to play with them. I did consider using them as a backup system for my backup system. Other options include old game servers, paperweights, axle stands. I personally prefer the design of the 4600 with the bar that runs across the front. I'm tempted to strip a couple of these systems down and make one giant 3U server with a proper old school system inside it. But what would you do? Unfortunately, I don't have any drive caddies for these systems, so the only way to hold the disk drive in is to shove it in and then lock it in place with a bit of blue tack. Classy, I know, but sometimes you have to make these sacrifices for the greater good. Power draw wise, I noted that most of these systems will sit at around 55 watts from the wall, which I don't think is terrible, but compared to modern systems is probably rubbish. So there we have it, another video featuring the Thecus 1U 4500 and 4600R. Remembering that R means redundant. These boards share a lot of similar systems, components to several other products from the Thecus lineup, and they seem to be interchangeable from what I can tell. I've been RevTed, this has been Revivify, and I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please click on the suggested videos from YouTube. YouTube personally feels that you will like the sound of my voice in the videos displayed here. Please also considering liking and subscribing. You know what to do. By now, you've probably watched 100 billion hours of YouTube like I have, and still haven't clicked that like button.